Welcome, everybody, to the Christian Fiction Fans Book Club. Today we are with Heather Kaufman, the author of Before the King, and I am going to read you her bio and then we'll jump in with some questions for her. So, Heather Kaufman is the author of Up from the Dust, Martha's Story, and Before the King, Joanna's Story. And these are in a series. And if I have heard correctly, there's more to come. So, we'll ask her about that. The first two books in her Women of the Way series with Bethany House Publishers. A former editor turned writer, Heather worked 8 years in the publishing industry while earning her master's degree and spinning tales late into the night. When she fell in love with studying the Bible through a cultural lens, the words of Scripture came springing to life, and Jesus became even more astoundingly beautiful. Now she crafts stories that imaginatively enter the lives of biblical characters and compel readers deeper into the Bible. When not reading, writing, or accumulating mounds of books, Heather can be found exploring new parks with her husband and 3 children near their home in St. Louis, Missouri. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're super glad you're here. We're wondering if you would start by just sharing your journey to becoming an author.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. I'm kind of one of those stereotypical, like I was a little bookworm growing up. I was writing poetry like since the age of like 6, and just I was always writing. I kept a journal since I could write. All the way through college, just pretty religiously. So I've always been writing. I've always been reading. It was around the age of 11, maybe 11, 12, somewhere around there where I kind of decided that I wanted to be a novelist. I remember explicitly thinking like, I could do this. I think I want to do this. And I just kind of decided that that's what I was going to do. And then as I got older, I realized like, this seems like it might actually be hard to make happen.
Yeah,
And especially if you're gonna like have some sort of career or make any money out of this, like this
yeah.
is kind of challenging. So I pivoted a little bit and I decided, well, you know what? The next best thing to being an author is to be working with authors. So then I decided to study English and pursue like a career in publishing. So I got my undergraduate and then my master's in English, and I interned for some publishing companies, and then I ended up working for Concordia Publishing House, which is actually here in St. Louis, and worked there for a number of years. So, but I was always writing, and I always had this desire to be a writer myself. And then it ironically ended up being my position at Concordia that opened the door to then have my first contracted writing. So I do actually have 2 books before the Women of the Way series,
Oh,
published through Concordia Publishing House. And they're contemporary fiction. They're very different from each other and from these books. So,
uh-huh.
but that was my first foray into being a published author. Was I
Okay.
did publish 2 contemporary fiction with them. And then as I was having my family and I was deciding to kind of pivot and stay at home with my kids, I decided to kind of really focus on this writing thing. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when the idea for Up From Dust happened. And because I knew I was switching genres, I was going from contemporary to biblical,
Yeah.
not only historical but biblical. And I was thinking, okay, I want to pursue maybe a larger publishing company. That's when I decided because I did not have an agent up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I decided, okay, I'm going to pursue an agent who can help me navigate this as I'm switching gears into a different genre and I'm approaching bigger publishers. So that's when I started that process. And it was a pretty long process. I had the idea for Up From Dust back in 2016,
Okay.
and I think I signed with my agent in 2019, and I finished, and I had part of the book written at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I finished the manuscript in 2020, and then I signed with Bethany in 2022.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, that's kind of a very long process, but it's kind
Yeah.
of been my journey to this point.
So I'm really curious about that first book that you published with Concordia. And you said, I mean, you were working for them, so that kind of gave you an
Right.
in. What
Yeah.
was that process like? Because we just talked to Amy Lynn Green last month,
Yeah.
and she was working for Bethany, and that's how she ended up getting her book in the door kind of anonymously through one of her coworkers. But it sounds like maybe you had a similar story.
Yes, it was because I did not work in that department. So I worked in periodicals and consumer books, so like
Hmm.
Christian books. But I knew the editor, and she knew me, and she knew I actually had went to college with her daughter, so she knew me actually beyond
Yeah,
professionally. And so she knew that I was into creative writing, and she knew that I was pursuing it kind of on the side. So
sure.
she approached me because Concordia, they've always published like children's books, but at that point they had not been publishing adult fiction. And they had also published, I think, some YA, but they'd not published adult fiction. And so they were expanding and going to try to publish adult fiction. And so she's like, well, we have one of our own who has all is in,
Right.
into this. So she actually approached me and asked for a proposal. And I had one because, again, I'd been doing this on the side.
Yeah,
I gave her what I had and it kind of went from there. So, but we did kind of cut out the middleman of the agent just
right.
because I did have an established relationship with her and she was already familiar with me and with the quality of my writing. So
Hmm.
we did kind of cut out that middleman. So it was a different kind of beast when I decided to go
Yeah.
branch out. It was a
Hmm.
different experience, but with that one, yeah, I got to kind of go straight to the editor and she
Yeah,
worked closely with me, and it was a really great experience. I learned quite a bit through
sure.
that. Yeah.
And so was your manuscript written when you put the proposal together for her, or it was just an idea at that point, or?
So that first book was I actually had written it was a novella at that point with
Hmm.
plans to expand it into a full-length novel. So what I gave her was the novella, and then I gave her like an outline of like how I plan to expand it to
Yeah,
a full-length novel. Yeah. Yeah.
very cool. Well,
Yeah.
that's really interesting because I didn't know anything other than what you had for Bethany House. So
Yeah.
super fun to see how you started. So that it sounds like now you've written 4 books and published 4 books.
Yes, I do have a children's book. I don't know if you're familiar with the Arch books through Concordia Publishing House, but they are a little, I have it somewhere, but they are little children's books that tell different Bible stories. So I do have
Oh,
them as well. Yeah,
okay.
Kingdom of the 5,000.
Fun. Oh,
Yeah.
fun. So 5 books, and then this one that we read before the King is your most recent.
Yes. Yes.
But in this series, what more do you have planned?
Yeah, yeah. So the first book is Up from Dust, and then Before the King is book two, and then we do have plans for a third book, and that will be the final book in the series.
Okay.
There will be 3 books total, and the lens actually really is lesser known female followers of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
kind of the angle we took. So when
Yeah.
I signed with Bethany originally, interestingly, when we pitched to Bethany, my Martha story, Up from Dust, I had ideas on doing a trilogy on the siblings. So I was
Uh-huh.
going to be called Siblings of Bethany, and it's going to be on Martha, Lazarus, and Mary. And
Yeah.
they were actually the ones, Bethany was the one who said they were afraid of like some redundancy and different
Sure.
things. And they were like, well, what if instead we did female followers of Christ? And I'm like, well, it feels like it's been done. And they're like, what about? And then I was like, well, what about lesser known female
Mhm.
followers of Christ?
Yeah.
So, yeah, because I mean, even with Martha's story, we think of Mary often,
Yeah.
right? Sister. So
Hmm.
she's probably the best known out of the heroines, Martha, but
Yeah.
she's still kind of out of the sisters. She's kind of that lesser, she's kind of the behind the scenes sister.
Right.
So that was really the angle we took was the lesser known female
Yeah.
followers.
And then the third book, do we know who that is going to be
Yes.
about?
Yes, Salome, the mother of James and John, so the mother of the Sons
Mhm.
of Thunder. And she does, so like Joanna does not have any recorded dialogue with Jesus, right? Like
Right.
we know a lot about her life and we can deduce a lot about her life, but she doesn't actually, and we know that she was healed by Jesus, but we don't actually have a recorded incident between her and Jesus.
Yeah.
With Salome, we do. She asks for the thrones, right, for her sons on his left,
Hmm.
right. So yeah, book three is going to be on the mother of the Sons of Thunder.
Neat. Oh, that'll be so fun. And how far into the process are you with that book?
Yeah, so actually I just received, so I had turned the manuscript in to my editors in March, and I just received the initial feedback on that. And so that's where most of the editing, most of the big picture edits are going to take place here, where rewrites and cutting things and adding things and things like that. So it's back on my desk for that, and I have to turn it back into them at the end of May. So the end of next month. Ooh, so fast. But and then it'll go on from there to like some more nitty-gritty, like the line edit,
Yeah.
copy, proofreading from there. So right now I have it back for some rewrites. So
Okay. And do you have a publishing date for that one?
yeah, so they're planning on January as well. So January of next year.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. That's gonna
Good.
be so soon.
Yes. That's so exciting.
Yeah.
Um, and so we talked a little bit about this, about how long it took you to get that process started with the first novel. How was the process then with this one? It's the second one. Did it go faster?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it definitely was faster because I was under contract. So it was I had like a year
Uh-huh.
turn it in. But because there was so much research that went into this, I spent 3 months out of that year doing nothing but reading, nothing but
Mm.
researching. And so that was a little nerve-wracking because, every week that goes by, you're like, that's one less week of
Yeah,
writing.
the
You
clock
know
is
what I mean?
ticking.
Like, it's painful. But with her story, I really needed to because in many ways I felt like I was starting over. I felt like a lot of the research I did for Martha's story, which was more rural, and it was more like, what was everyday life like? And
Hmm.
this one was like, what is like aristocratic court life? Like, you know what I mean? I like it just was so different that I'm like, oh my goodness, I just have to like start over with everything. So I spent like probably at least 3 months just researching before I started writing. So I really wrote the first draft in 9 months.
Okay.
So that was really fast for me. Some people, that's not fast. For me, that is like super fast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, speaking of the research, that is one of the things that's been most fascinating to me as I think about this book, because historical fiction always, there's an element of research, but this is time of Christ biblical
Right.
fiction. We're talking 2,000 years ago. You can't just go to the library and check out World War II novels, like, so
Yeah.
where do you find your sources and how do you dig enough to really get into that time period? And how did you learn about this very obscure Joanna that only her name's mentioned twice, briefly? So
Yes.
how do you find out?
Yes, and that's excellent questions. And one of the things I discovered too is that not all resources are like equivalent.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned to pay attention to the dates when things were published. Like this might be outdated research,
Yeah.
and just how varying opinions are because when it's that old, when it's history that is that old, that you find people are like, oh no, Judea was really more like, or Galilee was really more like this, and Sepphoris was really, the city of Sepphoris was more like, and no, it was really more like that. So you have like people like all over the board with certain things. So you do have to kind of be careful. At the end of the day, you kind of have to, sometimes when it's truly we just don't know, you kind of choose your camp. Like,
Yeah.
but I was able to find very current research on Joanna, and it truly was a God thing. I started out researching Herod Antipas because I thought like, well, this would be a good in because she's closely tied to Herod Antipas's court. So let me start by just studying him. Like, what were the politics like at the time? The waters that she was swimming in. And so I read the book Herod Antipas by Harold Horner, and very dry. But I read the whole thing, even the footnotes. But even then, like Joanna was actually mentioned in there, but she was a footnote. She was just kind of like
Mm-hmm.
a footnote. And then I was like, okay, that was really informative on the politics, but like what can we know about Joanna? Like I need to know
Yeah.
like, about her. as a person, and can we know anything about her? And I actually read Rebecca McLaughlin's Jesus Through the Eyes of Women. Sorry, I'm looking back at my bookshelves. That's what I'm doing. Jesus Through the Eyes of Women, which is a newer publication through the Gospel Coalition. And she had some more on Joanna, but again, it wasn't enough. I'm like, nah, I need like more on her.
Yeah.
But in her footnotes on Joanna, she referenced Gospel Women by Richard Bauckham. And he has a 90-page chapter dedicated to
Oh,
Joanna. And he's very scholarly. I have a friend who is a New Testament professor, and I ran this resource by him, and he's like, "Oh, he is very reputable. Like he is the top in his field. Like you can trust like the
yeah.
resources." So I was like, "Okay, that makes me feel good." And he had dedicated like 90 pages to just to Joanna. And a lot of it was just inference, like for example, Kuza's name is probably most likely, a lot of the resources I read, it says very probable that he was Nabatean. And so there were just certain things that we can deduce then from like, okay, what kind of Jewish woman would be married to a Gentile man, and what can we know about her family because of that? And they married within the same socioeconomic circle. So there's a lot of inferences. Like we don't know for sure that Joanna came from a Sadducean family, but because the Sadducees were kind of the elite of the time, I placed her in a Sadducean family. So again, these things are just inferences from the things we do know about her. So that was the process. But it was like this roundabout like journey to that one resource that ended up being the bedrock, honestly, for how I ended up portraying Joanna.
Yeah.
Um,
So, talk to us a little bit about that too, because you've got these two verses in scripture. And now you've found 90 pages on this woman from 2000 years ago, and you've got to make up some of her story, but
yes.
based on some little facts. So, what were some things that you kind of manufactured, and what was the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, as I was learning more about the world that she probably inhabited,
Hmm.
um, the politics that she would have been a part of, the she most likely came from a very Hellenized, Greek influenced, right, Jewish family. So it's a Jewish family that is very removed from the common Jewish people and Jewish religious life. So as I was thinking through this, it became more and more astonishing that she followed Jesus. I was like, okay, but she ended up not just following him, but like supporting him from her own means and ongoing. Like a lot of the research implied that this was like an ongoing thing. And because she's at the empty tomb and she's part when the angels say, or when I forget if it's Luke, but who mentions that these are the women that had followed him from Galilee. There's this implication that she has been following him for a long time and actively supporting him. So then, really, it came down to I asked the one question. I asked this question. Sometimes my best breakthroughs come from just me posing questions to myself. So I asked myself this question. I was like, what compelled her or cracked her heart open to be receptive to Jesus to the point where she probably was doing something that was a little dangerous.
Hmm.
We don't know, like, I mean, I imagine that her husband ended up being supportive, but we don't know. We don't know if she was widowed. Like, we don't know if he was still alive or if he knew about this or if Herod knew about this or any of her sphere. But like I'm imagining things like it couldn't have been very safe. And so like what compelled her and what cracked her heart open, given the background that she came from, what compelled her to support him? And in answering that question, I imagined a sister who did not fit in her life.
Hmm. Yeah.
I imagined a sister that was alienated from the
Hmm.
family. I imagined this deep wound that kept her heart open because she saw the injustice of that. And so she's never fully embracing this world that she's in because she has this sister who is use quote unquote useless, right, to the
Hmm.
family. And then she sees the faith of her sister, and that is what cracks her heart open to then be ready for Jesus's message. So really that's kind of how I constructed her backstory is like, man, what are the characteristics we can kind of draw from scripture? This was probably a very brave woman. This was probably a
Hmm.
very educated, maybe assertive, bold, brave woman to be able to do this.
Yeah.
What fed that bravery? And so that's where Dahlia came in. I was like, what if
Hmm.
she had a sister and that fed her bravery? So
Yeah. Well, and I was also thinking too, kind of the same way you are of imagining, and what we do know is that she was someone who Jesus healed.
yes,
And so you put that in there so beautifully to create such a hardship and disability that she lived with for a long time. So to have a miracle performed to her, I think that also would open her heart and go, oh, whoa, that like something's going
yes,
on here, you know?
yes, exactly. Exactly. And then her being defined by that wound because she ties that to that darkest moment
Yes.
of her life, and then being hesitant to receive that grace, but then Christ just giving her mercy anyway. And so, yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. That cracking her open even more. Yeah.
Yeah. And I loved this part of the story with Susanna, where they were kind of um, rivals in the social system in the beginning. And Susanna is a real person too,
Hmm.
but we another one that we don't really know about. And so that was a sweet part of the story, especially how they both came full circle to be followers of Christ and to be friends again then at the end.
Yep.
Um, I want to open it up for a minute and see if anybody on the call has questions for Heather before I proceed with more questions. Is there anything anybody else? You can either unmute and ask, or you can type it in the chat and I will ask.
I don't have a question, but I just wondered the whole time I was reading it how you got all that information and what kind of studying to. It was amazing to me.
Oh, thank you.
Of
Thank you.
all the books that we've read, it's like, how did she do that?
Yeah, that's what I kept thinking too. Well, now we know 3 months of reading very dry books
Yes, exactly. Exactly right.
and not writing a word.
Yeah.
I wondered if you were a biblical scholar or something when you were in college when I was reading it.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I do see like no, I would love to go to seminary or like to study the Bible formally, but I have not had the privilege of doing that, but I did get my master's in English and I did a lot of dry reading for that. And so I do think actually those study skills have translated to this.
There you
To be
go.
able to read these texts and to kind of like, so yeah, I actually do think that that has helped. Yeah.
I was curious about the way you like how involved is it hard to not get involved with your story? I mean, are you able to stand back when I guess I don't know what I'm trying to say. This was really hard for me in the beginning. I almost put it down and said I can't do this because of the sister. I was
Yeah.
so angry. I
Yeah.
was so angry. And that says you're a good writer because you really got me into it, right? I mean, I know this was fiction, but I was just so into it. And I
Yeah.
guess my question is, when you're doing that, how hard is that for you to get, do you get emotionally attached like I, the reader? Is it hard for you? Because I was surprised you kept going with it. Because
Yeah.
I was so upset with her family. I was so upset, the story, and I'm like, it's not getting better. It's not getting better. And I just kept getting more angry. So I was wondering, as the author, how involved do you get, or is it easier to be able to stand back because you know you're creating it?
That's a really good question. So it I think it's probably easier for me because I knew from the beginning that she was not, and this is okay. I can give away spoilers, right? Everyone's actually read it, and I'm okay to
We
like,
try not to do too much spoiling, but I think you're safe
okay,
with it.
okay, because I'm like, I don't know what I'm about to say. Um, but like, I guess I could say it this way, like I knew my plan for Dahlia. So, because I knew the end for Dahlia, if that makes sense. As I was writing it, I knew the ending was going to be good, like good and hopeful. So I think that helped me get through it because I do know the bigger picture with her. There, I am when I plan it out, I am a little bit more of a pantser in that I kind of loosely plan the story out. But with big major characters like that, like I usually do know like where they're ending up. And so I knew from the beginning that Dahlia was going to have a hopeful ending. And so I think that did help in writing those scenes because I knew kind of the others, the flip side of it. Now there were other scenes. So like when I wrote Jesus's trial before Herod, I almost couldn't write it. That was just really hard. It was very emotionally difficult to write his trial before Herod. So that was hard just because of the, you know, the gravity of it and the fact that he really didn't care this. So that was really challenging, and I cried while doing that. But with Dahlia specifically, there was just so much hope on the other side that I knew was coming that that helped kind of buoy me. Yep.
And my other question was about how did you decide to make her such a strong woman? I was so impressed because I was like, this was, so many years ago.
Yeah.
I just can't imagine women standing, like in her first marriage that she was supposed to get married, standing up to her family, vocally, about
Hmm.
what happened to her sister, things like that. How did you come about to make her? I love that about her, that she was so strong. But we read that more in contemporary fiction
Yes.
than that. So I was wondering how you came about with that because that was beautiful.
Yes. And that was part of me taking the character trait of bravery and thinking like, okay, she comes across from the little we see of her in scripture, and then what we can kind of deduce about her life through cultural studies and history, she seems as someone who necessarily had to be very brave. And then the research was telling she was probably very cultured. She could probably read and write and speak multiple languages. Like the research was telling me these things that the world that she was inhabiting and came from was much different than the Jewish woman that we tend to think of, making the bread and making the, like she was probably very cultured, probably like a patroness. So channeling her funds to benefit, different things. So as I was thinking of that Joanna and trying to trace her back, I saw, okay, where are those moments in her life? Because she doesn't really start out that way. And in fact, even in the prologue, it says that she starts out, oh, what is it like? Through fear and like she is hiding. I think in the prologue, I say something like that through years of my story, however, begins in a place of fear, hiding, and uncertainty. For my heart had yet to learn its greatest lesson that God is as near as our own breath. And I think the bravery comes as she realizes that God is as near to her as her own breath. And then her seeing the enormity of stepping from part one to part two and what's going to be required of her to be this established man's wife, right? In name only, but that then gives her the backbone to be like, I can't do this unless you empower me to do this. Like, I can't. So she doesn't start off this strong, certain woman, but I'm trying to show how she becomes that way. And it's through everything she's experienced, and then her deciding to believe that God is as present. He preserved her life for a reason, and he's as present as her own breath. And so then that gives her the backbone to kind of stand up for herself and stand up for the truth. So the truth becomes super important to her, right? And so she decides, like, whatever happens, I have to live by the truth. And so that's kind of how I ended up tracing it. Again, it started with that concept of, okay, she's a brave woman. How did she become that way? And what fueled her bravery? So, yeah.
I'm curious a little bit about the Nabatean culture because this is not something I knew anything about. And is this true that in their culture, because it seemed like Kuza, is that how you say?
I am trying to remember. So I think you're right, because I had been saying it wrong in my head like for a long time.
Uh-huh.
And then when the audiobook came out, I was like, oh, I think I've been saying it wrong. I think it's Kuza. I was saying Chaza.
Okay.
I think it's Kuza.
Kuza.
Yes.
So he really empowered her to
Yes.
be independent. Was that a part of that culture normally?
Yeah, so in the research I did, and I didn't research their culture as extensively as I did with the court of Herod and different things, but
Mm-hmm.
in the research that I did on their culture, it did seem like women did have more economic status, so they could own property and
Mm-hmm.
they could buy and sell, whereas like Jewish women did not enjoy that privilege.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that definitely you can see him valuing women in a way that maybe.
Right.
Yes, and so I think part of that is culturally because, and again, I was going off of the fact that women were afforded more socioeconomic rights in that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think also part of it is his own personal history of he feels like he let down his first wife, and
Yeah.
so like, never again am I going to ignore,
Mm-hmm.
the needs of, so
Right.
so that also plays into it, I think too, where he has this respect for women,
Yeah.
partly because of the guilt of his past and partly because of his culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that those factors made her a stronger woman as well,
Yes.
like Elda was talking about. I was also curious at the end. I wanted an extra epilogue. Have you ever thought of writing an extra epilogue? Because you kind of tied up a lot of loose ends, but there were these questions I had, like I want to see some of these reunions and some of the
Yes.
conversations that happen afterwards.
Okay, so a funny story is I did not originally write it with an epilogue, but multiple editors throughout the process were like, we think that readers maybe are going to want to see a little bit more at the end here. And so finally, toward the end of the editing process, I actually wrote an epilogue. And we actually put it in the book and it was formatted and everything. And then we just kind of were on the fence about it. There were some editors who were like, yeah, and then some editors were like, maybe not. And I just finally went with my gut and I was like, you know, from the beginning, I did not envision an epilogue for this book, so we're just gonna cut it. We're gonna pull it. But I do actually have this epilogue
Oh.
still intact. So I'm actually thinking of like offering it as like a
Yeah.
freebie to my newsletter
I,
subscribers.
yes.
So do
Yes.
you think that's something that I should do?
I do. Yeah, that's actually, I was thinking because a lot of authors do that. They have a link at the end
Yeah.
for the bonus epilogue. And I was like, I would get that for sure.
Okay. Okay. I think I'm gonna have to do this then. Okay. Yeah. I'll have to do
All right. We have a question here from Ms. Grove. It says, is it hard to do edits? Is there a time where you have been, no, please don't make me take that out, or it changed the story by changing what they said to edit? Um, yeah, so let's do that.
Yeah, that yeah, and the editing on this one was really intense. I think partly because I did turn it around in a shorter time span because I had so much research up front. So I ended up turning in a manuscript that was messier than I probably would have liked. And the editors were like, "It's okay. It's like the curse of book two. Like we all like it's
Yeah.
okay. Like where it's expected. It's all right." But it did mean that the editing was just messier on this one. And there were more rewrites on this one.
Hmm.
So in the stage where I'm at now with book three, like when I got the initial feedback on book two, it was just like, oh, there was just like a lot of stuff.
Overwhelming. Yeah.
And so I would say like the biggest things at that point where part one and part two felt very disjointed at that point. And I ended up, one of their biggest things was I actually had the mother as a character throughout the whole book.
Mm.
And they were like, she does not belong in part two.
Uh,
And I was like, oh, okay. So you're just telling me to kill a character off half a book
Kill your darlings.
early. So that was definitely challenging. But then I quickly got on board with it when I saw their reasoning and it ended up being a better story. But another thing was like it was really hard for me to pinpoint the dynamic between Kuza and Joanna. And so actually the idea of the chaste marriage came in a rewrite. So it was not originally written that way.
Mm.
And so but I would say any edits that I did with this one weren't like there was nothing where I was like, oh, but I loved that and now it's gone. Or
Yeah.
it wasn't because I knew things weren't working. I think the whole time it was like, I know it's not working yet. So like how
Right.
can you get it to work? So none of it was really like I wasn't really de personally devastated by any of it. It was more of just like, like trying to get it to gel and to work and things like that. So, yeah, the editing on this one was a little intense, but I felt like my goal was like each time I touch it, it just needs to be a little better. Like
Yeah.
that's what I kept telling myself.
Well, I think you accomplished that because in the end, it's a great book. Ms. Grove also said she missed about, we were kind of talking about the cover a little bit at the beginning. So could you talk to us a little bit about the making of the cover? Like, how did it come about? Did you get any input in that? Or does the publisher just say, here it is?
Yeah, it's probably different publishers are slightly different, but the way Bethany House does it is I fill out something called a title and positioning questionnaire, and I do that pretty early. I'm trying to think. Um, for example, with this latest book, book three, I filled it out in December. So I fill it out over a year before the book is published.
Hmm.
And it's things like details about the each main character and what their personality is like, what they physically look like, comparable titles that I like that, like, okay, well, I really love this cover because of this, and I like that cover because of this, and settings that are important, like like for example, the palace on this one, I was like, a palace is really important. Things that I don't want to see on the cover. Like I really just don't want this or whatever. Trying to think what else was on it, but like all sorts of questions that help them kind of flesh out. And then they flat out ask, like, do you have any visions of what the cover should look like? And so I have
Hmm.
hands to tell them. Now with this, because it was book two, we weren't totally going into it blank because we knew that we wanted it to mimic the
Yeah,
book one with like the overlay and like the significant other, and like so
right.
there was some already guidance, but
Sure.
with how we were going to do it. But like when I filled it out with this one, I was the one that suggested doing the overlay. And I
Uh-huh.
gave examples of books that I enjoyed that had that component where it was kind of blended in, and they
Yeah.
they went with it. But then they send me the initial cover image, and then I do get a chance to give feedback on it. So like for example, I know we're talking about this one, but with book one, initially this background was water. And I was like, does not play a role in this. Water's nowhere
Mhm.
near this, so we tweaked it to a sunrise because that is more significant. For this one, there actually wasn't a lot. They had the Jerusalem here and they had the palace. There were just a few minor tweaks where I can't even remember. I was like, oh, this word was too big, and can we define her shoulder a little bit more? Like there really wasn't much tweaking, but they give me the opportunity to put forth those suggestions. Like, I love this, but I don't really love that.
Yeah,
You can rethink this. So they are very responsive with it. At the end of the day, it's their call and they're going to
sure.
do, but they are very, there is give and take there, and they
Yeah.
do are very open to the feedback. So.
I'm also curious about the process of choosing your titles because I know when you're working with a publisher, sometimes they dictate that a little more. So how was that? Did you have input in that?
Yes, yes, and that is part of that title and positioning form is
Okay.
title suggestions.
Yeah.
And so I think it's kind of rare. I don't know if it's rare or not, but in this series, I Up from Dust was my suggestion.
Hmm.
Women of the Way was my suggestion. Um, the third book in the series, the title that is we have a finalized title, and that book was that title was my suggestion. The only title that has not been my suggestion was Before the King.
Okay.
And at this point, like we knew we wanted like a prepositional phrase, like a three-word prepositional phrase.
Hmm.
And I actually had suggested before his face,
Mm.
meaning because I really wanted to communicate like living coram Deo, like before the face of God,
Yeah.
my idea. But they were like, that sounds a little brash, like before his face. Like it just, it like and they were suggesting like royalty, like king, and
Hmm.
then play off of King Jesus and King Herod. And I was like, oh, that is a little more like jumps off of a bookshelf, like before the king, not before his face. Like I
Yeah.
get it. Like I was like, okay, I can get on board with that. Like but really, yeah, that was their suggestion. It was like a tweak on the title that I had suggested. So
Yeah. Very cool. We did get another comment. Yes, do the
And
epilogue. So you're
okay.
getting more more
I just
votes.
wanted to piggyback on what you said about the Before the King. I thought it was so appropriate because throughout it, there kept saying, "Are you trying to say you're the king? Are you,
Yes.
and it just so like, who's the king? He's the king. Hey, are you trying to say?" So I thought that the title really fit well, I didn't get it in the beginning, but
Yes.
once I got to that, I was like, oh, that's why it's called that.
Yes, I love that. And so I love that aha moment of, I think that's, yes,
Yeah.
I'm so glad.
I feel like that's a sign of a really good title is when all of a sudden in the middle of the book you're like, ah, like I
Yes.
get it. Like it all makes sense. Yeah.
I love that too.
Um, Pam shared that she has not read the book. She's eagerly awaiting when her
Oh,
library makes it available because it's so popular and the wait time is quite a few more weeks. But she is curious, do any other periods of history attract your interest for future writings?
yeah, yeah. No, so I am actually talking to Bethany House about some future projects. And for now, I'll be staying in New Testament era biblical
Mhm.
fiction. But honestly, like um I could see going back to contemporary at some point.
Okay.
I really do enjoy writing contemporary. I enjoy reading contemporary. I enjoy historical too. Like I've always read
Mhm.
historical, and biblical too. But I think I have some ideas that are contemporary that I would like to explore. I don't know if I'll get the chance to do that anytime soon, but I do have some contemporary ideas that would be fun to flesh out.
So, like, when this series is wrapped up, what is your next step then? Do you have to go through your agent and pitch a new series, or does Bethany come to you and say, "Hey, we have some ideas. What is your interest in this? How does that work?"
That might be different with different authors and different houses. In my case, it was very much the editor saying, "Oh, now that we're reaching the end of my contract, we would like to see what else Heather has." So
Yeah.
they put it on me. They just gave the boundaries of we would like to see New Testament era.
Hmm.
And so that was the only kind of caveat they gave. And then I'm actually in the process of fleshing out some ideas that I'll then send to my agent. And then she'll work with me probably to get those in good shape. And then we'll send those over to my acquisitions editor. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. So sometimes there is a piece of the author in the characters that they write. Is there any part of you that you would say is like Joanna?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like I related more with Martha in Up from Dust just because I'm an older sister and I tend to worry a lot. Very anxious. But as far as Joanna goes, though, she definitely is someone that I try to depict as kind of um, who doesn't quite fit in, doesn't quite know her place. Like in part one, she's got the world that her sister inhabits and then the world that she inhabits, and feeling like she's straddling kind of these
Hmm.
two realities. And then that then translates into part two, where she's straddling the realities of court life, but then this group of disciples that are becoming so important to her, but who view her with suspicion.
Yeah.
So she again is kind of caught between two worlds. And I would say like there's me in that. I grew up military, so I moved all over the place. I was also homeschooled, and
Hmm.
I can kind of relate to that feeling of being caught in between,
Yeah.
and just feeling like maybe you're not quite sure. You're starting over again. You're starting over again.
Hmm.
Not sure where you belong. So Joanna then has to learn that she finds her groundedness and her belonging in Christ. And at the end, when she says she's worn like face after face after face, but she decides that this is the face, right? Moving forward, this is how she's going to be defined. And it's through her identity in Christ. It's through the face that beheld God in the garden. And so that kind of is something that I have walked through of my identity is not where I was raised or how I was educated or all of these other different factors that we can kind of group our identity around. But my identity comes from Christ, and then moving forward, that's how I'm going to live, and that's what grounds me, and that's how I belong. So I would say that's how I kind of resonate with her.
Yeah. I love that. It's nice. So we've learned a little bit about your writing process that you spend a lot of time researching before you ever put a word down on the page. Do you have kind of a writing routine? I mean, this is your job, but you also have kids and a life. And so how do you work this in?
Yes, and so in the stage of life I'm in now, my two oldest kids are in elementary school. My daughter is still in preschool, and so I treat the she's at preschool 3 mornings a week, and so I treat those as my like office hours.
Yeah.
Essentially, I protect those as like that is those are my office, my working hours. And I quickly discovered that like different parts of the writing process, I need different things at the different
Hmm.
parts of the writing process. So when I'm writing the first draft, I need uninterrupted daytime hours. Kudos to people who can like write until midnight, but
But you have to
like
get up in the morning and get kids off to school. So,
yes, thank you. Like, it's like, I don't know how these people do it. Like, so I just discovered that when it comes to the first draft, I really do need uninterrupted. And again, uninterrupted, like, there's been times where I was trying to fit it in nap time, but it's like, you really, for me, I can't, with the first draft, I can't have an hour here and an hour there and a half hour here. Like, I need a chunk of daytime hours. And so, I wrote like the entirety of the first draft of this during those preschool hours that she was there, and then sometimes on weekends if my husband could would watch the kids, and I would do it on
hmm
weekends. So that's what. But then if I'm doing something like editing, like responding to to edits and like
hmm
even rewriting, that's something for whatever reason I could do that late at night. I don't know why. Like there's certain just I can't do the the first draft, but I can rework what I have. I can do that in the evenings. So I found like when it comes to stuff like that or things that other things related to the author life, like crafting my newsletter or social media posts, like those are the things that I can slip in the half hour here or the hour here or after the kids are in bed and things like that. So it's kind of how I work it. And it's just I had to really get over like the feeling like I needed to be inspired. And I think partly knowing when my hours were, like, okay, these are my writing chunks. It's like, ready or not, that's what I'm doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Kind of like any other job where you're just like inspired or not, like, here we
Yep.
go. Like
Forced inspiration.
we're just gonna throw it down and we
Yep.
can rewrite it later.
That's right. Yeah. Make a mess, but get something on the page.
Exactly. Yep. Yep.
Ah. So, did you have any challenges when you were writing this book and or other books, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah. Well, this I kind of alluded to this before, but I think because the first draft ended up being so messy, the editing process just ended up being messier in general, and so that was a challenge. And it also ended up working out that every time, almost every single time, the book ended up back on my desk, it was at the worst possible moment for me personally. So it just and it almost and it got to the point in my editor ended up having things happening in her life that complicated things. And it was just like it got to the point where it was so pronounced that I was just like I had an aha moment that I'm like kind of feels like spiritual warfare. Like I just had this aha moment. I'm like, how can it be this badly timed? Everything about this book being this hard, like, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it finally dawned on me. I was so discouraged because at the same time I was writing the first draft for book three. So I'm marketing book one, I'm editing book two, and I'm writing the first draft for book three. And I was having very little joy in writing book three. I was very because I was so disheartened about how hard the editing was.
hmm
And it finally dawned on me. I'm like, this discouragement is just a weapon of the enemy to remove my hands from the work.
Yeah.
Kind of like in Nehemiah when they intimidate him from rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. And he, it's like, okay, when I had that aha moment, I'm like, you know what? Like, Satan does not like anything that makes a big deal out of Jesus.
Right.
Like, he
Yeah.
doesn't like that. And so, in a way, it was almost exciting because it was like, I get to do something that the devil hates with
You're getting
every
his
fiber
attention.
of his being. Like, I know that sounds weird. It sounds a little weird when you put it that way, but it's true. Like, and it's like I get to do something that shines a huge spotlight on Jesus. And
hmm
of course, he's not going to want that out in the world.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so when I can kind of step back and see that macro picture, it kind of did give me the endurance to see it through because I was like, no, this is worth finishing and it's going to be finished by God's grace,
hmm
and kind of gave me that steam to get to the end. But
Yeah. Um, that reminds me a little bit of one of the themes that I liked in this book of Joanna seems to need to weigh this heavily of, do you stand up for Jesus? Are you publicly out there proclaiming him, or is that going to put him into trouble? You
Yeah.
know, and you think about, you know, from our perspective now, 2000 years later, we can say, oh, don't worry about it. Like he's got this. But when you're in the middle of that, and there is that fear of, you know, I want to say the right thing and do the right thing that doesn't put him in jeopardy. And maybe for today, it's that doesn't put ourselves in jeopardy. You know, how
Yes.
much do we say? How much do we stand up without you know, ruffling some feathers and maybe, you know, and on social media getting people upset at you. You know, there's just so much in the world. You don't want to offend anybody, but do you have the courage to stand up? And I guess, you know, if in Jesus' day, Jesus has got this, it's fine. I think in our day, Jesus has got this too. Like he'll take care of it. You know, we just speak our piece. So we don't have to be offensive. Some
Right.
people will take offense no matter what you say, but yeah, that was a theme that I really enjoyed in the book. Really gave me pause,
Good.
made
I'm
me
so glad to
think.
hear that.
That was nice. Um, any particular books or authors that have inspired you or that you love to read? Because we're always looking for our next great book for our book club.
Yeah, I would say when I was first doing the beginning stages of like putting together the proposal for the first book in the series, and I was looking at like comparable titles and different things like that, I actually picked up Tosca Lee's Iscariot because I wanted to see how someone, because I'd read biblical fiction quite a bit, but I wanted, because I knew how I was going to approach that story, I wanted to see how someone approached like a first person narrative
Hmm.
of a biblical character.
Yeah.
So I landed on her book. And I would say, yeah, I really admire how she is very careful with her approach and careful with her research, but also like very bold. Like she humanizes Judas Iscariot, which is like a very like, very bold. Like, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? And so I just thought, like, oh, I just admired that, but she does it in a reverent way. And
Hmm.
so I just thought, like, I love this combination of bold reverence,
Mm.
where she's she's bold and careful at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah.
And I want to just bottle that up and just be that way because I think
Yeah.
that's such a cool way to be. Like, and in Christ we can be bold, and it's like, but treating these stories and this because this is our spiritual heritage. These things really happen. These people really lived. Treating it with reverence and care, but also not being afraid to be bold and entering these.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'd say Tasca Lee's book.
Okay. We're gonna have to look that one up. That sounds
Yeah.
like a good one. Well, our time is running up. Does anybody else have any burning questions or comments that you didn't get a chance to ask yet? All
Are
right.
your two contemporary books, are they still available? Even
They
though they're with a
are.
different publisher, are they still available or?
They are, yes. I think you can get them on Amazon. Um, you might check because I know someone bought it one time and it was like used, so you might want to double check to make sure, like unless you want used, but like yeah, they are, I think, still available on Amazon. So if you just look me up on Amazon, the first one's called The Story People, and the second one is called Loving Isaac. So,
And then the other question I had is in the beginning, you said the first book took, I think, before you got your publisher, or I don't know. It sounded like it was several years because you said 2017 and then 19 and
yes.
then 20. And then I was like, wow, that's a lot of years for one book. Now, do you have it like you roll one out every year or
Uh,
because I'm like, now you have five books, but that
right.
first one took a long time.
So the first one and went with Bethany was the one that took the longest because that's where I was trying to land an agent who would then because I had to pitch to an agent and she had to accept me, and I signed a contract with her, and then she actually pitches to the publishers for me, but she edited the manuscript. So like she completely read and edited Up from Dust, and I responded to her edits and reworked it. And then we did another proposal. So I had a proposal for her to land her, but then we did a proposal together to land in a publisher. And that document was massive. It was just this massive document. So that's really what took the length of time, was because I was going through those steps. But now that I've signed with my agent, things are a lot. It's kind of like with traditional publishing, like it's like once your foot's in the door, it goes a little smoother. It's like getting that foot in the door usually takes a really long time, but then once it's in, it's a little bit easier. So I have a really good working relationship. I've Cynthia Rukti is my agent with books and such, and we have a really good working relationship. So that's why the other books are happening sooner, because I already have the contract with the publisher and relationship with the publisher, and I already have my relationship with her kind of set. But yeah, getting that all set up was years and years.
So now you
Yeah.
can just write and edit and write and edit
Yes.
and
Mark it and write
and
and edit.
mark it and write and edit.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well, very good. We have so enjoyed having you here tonight, Heather, and I just want to remind everybody that please leave a review and a rating for Heather on Amazon, especially, but anywhere that you follow books, if you're on Goodreads or anything, because that's super helpful. And then, Heather, tell us where we can find you online. What's the best way to connect with you further?
Yes, so definitely my newsletter. So I have a Substack newsletter called Stories and Sundries, and you can sign up for that on my website. So if you just go to hmkstories.com, there'll be like a pop-up box that comes up where you can subscribe to my newsletter. And I send it out like once a month, and I do exclusive giveaways, things I'm enjoying, writing updates. So my next newsletter will reveal the title for my next book,
Ooh, we better
things like
get in
that. So
on
my
that.
newsletter subscribers get things first and all of that. And now I'm thinking I need to give my newsletter subscribers that epilogue. So
Yes,
I would say
we're
that's definitely the
all gonna
place
sign up
to,
for that.
yeah, to find out all the newest updates for sure.
All
So
right, perfect. Well, I will put that link in our email that goes out, and it'll also be in the notes on this when it's on YouTube so that people can find you easily and connect with you. Well, Heather, we loved your story. Thank you for all the wrestle and work that you did to make it what it is. And we appreciate so much you coming here and spending your evening with us and sharing just a little glimpse into your author life and into your story.
thank you so much, Deb. Thank you for reading. I know there's lots you could have read, so I appreciate you picking up this book and spending time with me and with this story. So thank you guys so much.
You bet. We felt like it was perfect to get us in the mood for the Easter seasons.
Yes. Oh, good. Good.
Thank you.